Welcome to Despicable Maine Deep Dive. Today on the show, we're really going to dig into some pretty heavy claims.
Definitely. We're looking at how some sources interpret the Bible regarding the, quote, Synagogue of Satan.
And this really staggering claim, that 89% of U.S. senators and Congress members apparently hold dual citizenship with Israel.
Yeah, along with allegations that Israel kind of boasts about controlling American speech and even U.S. national security policy.
It's a lot. And it ties into claims that Israel has sort of hijacked the U.S. government, leading to things like these new proposed boycott laws.
So for this deep dive, we've got, a mix of sources, excerpts from the Bible itself, Revelation and John, a text file making that dual citizenship claim, articles alleging this Israeli control, talking about AIPAC.
Right, and we've also got the text of House Resolution A667, that IGO Anti-Boycott Act, plus articles discussing the backlash against it.
Our aim here isn't to say if these claims are true or false, but to really unpack what the sources are saying, how they connect these dots.
Exactly. To help you, the listener, sort of see the arguments being made and, evaluate them critically. What's the logic? What's the evidence presented?
So let's start with that biblical concept, the Synagogue of Satan. Where does that come from?
Okay, so the sources point to the book of Revelation, chapters 2 and 3 specifically.
Right.
It mentions people who say that they are Jews and are not, but lie,
Ugh.
and calls their assembly the Synagogue of Satan.
And there's also John, chapter 8, verses 39 to 44. That's a pretty intense passage.
It really is. Jesus is speaking to people claiming descent from Abraham, and he tells them pretty bluntly, you are of your father the devil.
Whoa. Okay, so how do the sources interpret this?
Well, one interpretation we looked at says these passages were originally about Jewish religious leaders back then who rejected Jesus as the Messiah.
Right, a specific historical, theological context.
But then, and this is where it gets really controversial, the source basically equates this ancient synagogue of Satan with modern political Zionism.
How do they make that leap?
The reasoning seems to be based on the fact that most Jews, the source says over 95% in Israel and worldwide, still don't accept Jesus as the Messiah. They cite verses from 1 John and 2 John about denying the Father and Son.
So applying a first-century religious condemnation to a modern political movement based on ongoing religious differences, that's quite a connection.
It is, and the source doesn't stop there. It brings up Revelation 11.8.
Okay, what's that one?
It refers to Jerusalem, symbolically, as Sodom and Egypt. The source reads this as another condemnation of, modern Israel.
Taking symbolic language very, very literally against a modern state.
Seems like it. Then it gets even wilder. The Star of David.
Yeah, the symbol of Judaism.
The source claims it's not biblical, says it's actually a satanic conjuring tool.
A what? Seriously?
Yeah. Claims it was popularized by the Rothschilds and connects it to something called the Star of Remphan, mentioned in the book of Acts.
Okay, that's a really extreme claim about a major religious symbol.
Wow. And it also asserts that modern Israel has, swapped out the Torah and the prophets for the Babylonian Talmud, which the source paints in a very negative light.
So the overall picture from this interpretation is pretty damning, connecting rejection of Jesus to satanic influence, applying it broadly to most Jews and modern Israel, attacking their symbols and texts.
Yeah, it's a very specific, very harsh theological argument being made. Now let's shift gears a bit, though maybe it connects, to this claim about dual citizenship.
Right, the text file. It just states it flat out. 89% of our senators in Congress hold dual citizenship with Israel.
89%. I mean, just think about that number. Is there any, proof offered?
Well, the source file doesn't provide, official documents or anything concrete. It just makes the assertion.
And it implies this is why the U.S. makes certain foreign policy choices, right?
Right.
Specifically mentioned Syria.
Exactly. The implication is a conflict of loyalty, that U.S. policy is driven by Israeli interest because of this alleged dual citizenship.
And it lists names.
It does. A list of people from the Obama administration, the 112th Congress, mostly Democrats listed, actually. The source notes it was harder to find info on Republicans.
But again, just a list. No hard evidence presented in the source itself for any of them actually having dual citizenship.
Correct. It's presented as fact, but without verification within the document we reviewed.
So what's the source's explanation for how this supposedly happened? 89% is just massive.
Okay, get ready for this explanation. The source claims it's because of Israel First Zionists, and that these Zionists, supposedly linked to the Rothschilds again, control the U.S. government through the central banking system and, money creation.
Wow. Okay, so a vast conspiracy involving banking, Zionism, and installing dual citizens in Congress to control policy. That's quite the theory.
It's definitely a grand narrative. The source does try to make a distinction, saying Zionism isn't the same as Judaism, and claiming half of Jews reject Zionism.
But then it turns around and says top U.S. politicians, Obama, Biden, Bush, Hillary, Trump, are all Zionists because they gave speeches at AIPAC.
That's what the source claims, yes. Using AIPAC speeches as the litmus test for being a Zionist who prioritizes Israel.
So the logic chain is unverified dual citizenship leads to pro-Israel policy driven by Zionist control of banking and government. Okay, let's move to the next piece. Allegations about Israel controlling American speech.
Right, we looked at an article titled, Israel Brags About Controlling American Speech. Pretty provocative title.
Yeah, just a bit. What's the substance there?
It talks about a video clip. Apparently, it shows Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and the former U.S. Ambassador David Friedman.
Okay.
And the article claims they're, bragging about Israel having a hand in censoring Americans, specifically those who support Palestinian rights or criticize actions in Gaza.
Bragging about censorship. That's well bold. Does it say how?
It doesn't detail the exact mechanism in the summary we have, but the implication is direct influence. The article also brings in a civil liberties attorney, Janine Eunice.
What does she say?
She expresses concern that both U.S. parties are essentially owned by the Jewish lobby, pointing to AIPAC contributions, and sees it as a major threat to free speech.
Owned. Strong word.
Very. Eunice also apparently raised concerns about Zionist groups, maybe Beitar, potentially giving lists of protesters to authorities for deportation.
Whoa. Okay, that's a serious allegation. Deporting people for protesting.
Yeah. The article also mentions comments from a rabbi, Levi Shemtov, about needing to be anti-Semitic.
Okay. And what about the AIPAC leaks?
So, according to this source material discussing leaked audio, AIPAC's CEO, Elliot Brandt, is heard talking about having lifeline access to top Trump administration national security officials.
Lifeline access. Like a direct hotline to influence policy.
That's the strong implication, yes.
Right.
Boasting about controlling Washington and grooming U.S. officials, shaping foreign policy directly.
Any specific examples?
The audio reportedly features Dana Stroll, a former Pentagon official now with a pro-Israel think tank. She's described as basically acting like an Israel-first propagandist, justifying actions in Gaza. And she's quoted saying the U.S. gets as much intelligence from Israel as it gives to Israel, sort of framing it as an equal partnership, maybe pushing back on criticism of U.S. aid.
Interesting angle. Anything else from the leaks?
Yeah, apparently there was concern voiced by an AIPAC panelist about pro-Palestinian academics influencing AI algorithms.
Worried about the robots becoming pro-Palestinian.
Kind of sounds like it, yeah. The bigger point the article makes is that AIPAC's influence allegedly leads to attempts to criminalize criticism of Israel, framing it all as anti-Semitism.
Right. And the leak apparently mentioned something about arms sales, too.
Yeah, that an override of a block on an arms sale to Israel happened way faster under Trump than similar overrides for Saudi Arabia or the UAE, suggesting, again, preferential treatment.
Okay, so the picture painted is one of significant, potentially undue influence on policy and speech, coming directly from AIPAC and Israeli figures.
That's certainly the claim being made in these sources, yes.
Which brings us nicely, or perhaps not so nicely, to H.R. 867. The IGO Anti-Boycott Act.
Right. This was a bill introduced with bipartisan support, actually, Lawler and Gottheimer.
And the idea was to amend the existing Anti-Boycott Act from 2018.
Exactly. To extend it to cover boycotts aimed at international governmental organizations, IGOs.
What was the stated reason? Why target IGOs?
Proponents said it was to fight harmful and inherently anti-Semitic boycott efforts happening at the UN and similar places. Basically extending existing rules against foreign-led boycotts of U.S. allies.
But it caused a huge backlash, didn't it? Particularly from the right.
Oh, absolutely. Figures associated with the Maggie movement and some libertarians came out swinging against it.
On what grounds?
Primarily the First Amendment, freedom of speech. They argued the bill would essentially criminalize boycotting Israel, which they see as a constitutionally protected form of political expression.
Criminalize boycotts. What were the penalties?
Pretty severe. Civil penalties, criminal fines up to $1 million, and potentially prison time, up to 20 years.
20 years? For supporting a boycott. That seems disproportionate, to put it mildly.
It definitely got people's attention. We saw quotes from Marjorie Taylor Greene, Anna Paulina Luna, Thomas Massey, even former Rep. Matt Gaetz, all saying it violates free speech.
And what happened with the bill?
Well, after that pushback, the planned vote was apparently canceled, put on hold at least.
So the free speech arguments, for now, seem to have stalled it.
It seems so. And of course, this is all happening against the backdrop of, ongoing campus protests regarding Israel and Gaza, and this whole debate about whether boycotts are anti-Semitic or legitimate political tools.
Right, it plugs directly into that very heated, very current debate. So if we tie this all together, we started with these interpretations of the Bible, labeling a group Synagogue of Satan.
Then the unverified claim of massive dual Israeli citizenship among U.S. politicians, supposedly driving policy.
Followed by allegations, including supposed boasts, of Israel and AIPAC controlling U.S. speech, policy, even having special access.
And culminating in a legislative attempt, H.R. 867, to potentially criminalize boycotts against Israel, which critics slammed as a violation of free speech.
The sources we looked at definitely present these as interconnected issues, painting a picture of, well, significant external influence warping U.S. policy and potentially cracking down on dissent.
It's a complex web of claims, drawing from theology, unsourced assertions, leaked audio, and legislative debates.
Remember, soon living in the United States will be theft of your life.
As always, we really encourage you, the listener, to take this information as a starting point. Do your own research, look into these sources, read the opposing viewpoints.
Yeah, critically examine these claims for yourself. Consider the evidence or lack thereof and the implications. It's definitely a lot to think about.
Freedom's just a mascot now, waving pom-poms for the sacred cow. Capitol Hill's a synagogue, themed theme park with loyalty oaths and kosher shark tanks. They light menorahs with Constitution pages, smile like dentists with minimum wages. And if you ask who paid the bill, you're labeled crazy or sent the kill pill. Hijacked by the synagogue, where gods get blessed like monologues. They sell your voice in bulk discount racks, with lobbyists doing Gregorian chants and slacks. Hijacked by the synagogue, where justice limps like an old demagogue. And freedom's flag is dry cleaned weekly by voters who prefer things ethically neatly. They say dual citizenship like it's a BOGO deal. Buy one nation, get America for real. They swear allegiance like it's casual cosplay in temples of cash and delete trade foreplay. With policy written in Hebrew footnotes, they auction peace and diplomatic towboats. And if you ask why bonds fall free, they'll say, oy vey, it's democracy. Hijacked by the synagogue, not Moses, just Moses, Rothschild block. They tithe in Bitcoin, pray in packs, and salvation comes in military contracts. Hijacked by the synagogue, where liberty is sold like a discount catalog, and dissent's now classified as hate. So sit down, sinner, and obey the state.
Some clips more slippery than congressional ethics. Let us bow our heads to offshore accounts and pray for the stock market to bless thy weapon shipments.
Hijacked by the synagogue. Hijacked by the synagogue, where prophets drive Teslas and blog. They preach from think tank mountaintops, while truth gets frisked by Capitol cops. Hijacked by the synagogue, where lobbying is a sign-on's job. And every law's a kosher sausage made with secrecy and moral hostage.
This ain't about faith, it's about franchise. And brother, we're just paying customers at the church of plausible deniability.